Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 9th installment of Bonnie Banter with your host, the new Bonnie. So today we're going to be discussing why The Last of Us Part 2 has pretty much guaranteed itself in the spot of Game of the Year for 2020. Now, before I even begin going on my rant, I do want to tell you guys that this video is going to be full of spoilers. If you have not played the game for yourself or you haven't seen gameplay on it yet, I highly suggest you go check out someone else's gameplay or get the game for yourself. It's a fantastic game, of course. I'm going to be talking about that through the whole video, but make sure you do that before you come here. Now, that being said, if you don't care about seeing or hearing any spoilers, let's get right into this thing. So first off, I want to tell you guys that Naughty Dog blew away people's expectations. They already made a fantastic, perfect game, actually, if I can use that word to describe the first game, The Last of Us. Back in 2013, they made a perfect game that ended with Joel Miller going out on this epic quest to get Ellie, who is immune to the cordyceps virus, across the country so that the Fireflies could operate on her and try and find a cure to end it all. When Joel, making the human error that he makes, doesn't let them kill Ellie to get the cure, because getting the cure out of her or trying to find it would have meant that her life would be over with. Joel instinctively acted as a dad and stopped the doctor from operating. This being said, there really was no reason for us to get a sequel 7 years later, but we did, and honestly, it really pulled through. It was incredible to see that Naughty Dog had the incredible challenge of trying to come up with a game that was as good, if not better, than the first. Now, of course, rating this game standing alone, I would put it higher, but because it is a sequel and going off of what the first game had to offer us, I'm going to say that this game was just a little bit more disappointing than the first one. Not even disappointing. I wasn't disappointed by the game. It just lacked something that the first one had, because you can't compete with the first one. That's all. There was still not that much wrong with the game, but I am going to go through the good and the bad parts of this game. I'm not just going to give one side, even though most of this is going to be my opinion after I have played through the game myself, watched another gameplay, and went back through and played again, just because I know I missed so much when I was rushing through the story of it. So, the game is about revenge, and it's about how far human beings will go to get that revenge. How the game starts off is we're introduced to a new character named Abby, and she is with a group known as the Wolves, or the WLF, the Washington Liberation Front. And we don't know her story right away, but we know that she's after Joel, and the whole time you're trying to figure out just what she wants with Joel. And you find out after she has killed her, and once you're knee-deep in her story, that the doctor that was operating on Ellie and that was supposed to get the surgery over with and find the cure was the doctor that Joel killed in the first game. This set Abby on a path of vengeance, and she finally got it. But after seeing this, because Ellie was eyewitness to it, Ellie goes off onto her own journey to find Abby and seek revenge on her for killing Joel. So the whole game is sort of like a cat and mouse chasing back and forth, and you get to see a development of each of the characters and why the game has you questioning who is the real bad guy in this stance, because there's a good guy and there's always a bad guy. But this game really challenges your mind into believing that both people are bad and that both people are good, and they're just trying to do right by their dad and Joel, who is kind of also the dad, if you really think about it. There's a lot of good love interest in the whole story. There are a development of characters that you see that are new, that the game actually makes you enjoy. It's not something like The Walking Dead TV show, or even the Telltale games, where they're constantly introducing new characters and you just can't enjoy them, even though it's a story-driven game. It's not as action-packed. But this game was an action adventure, and it also added in some elements of horror. and it did everything so well. But the characters they introduced included Abby, Owen, Mel, Yara, Lev, and so many others that you do attain an interest for, even if it's just a few short interactions, or if it's a long, drawn out half the game that you have to play as the character who has just killed Joel, the person you cried over in the last game. Not only that, but we got to talk about the environment. The environment is one of the most important parts of the game. Gameplay, audio, graphics, and in this case it'd be like the fighting style. But graphics are always a huge thing in games, and they're always constantly like evolving to a point where it's become hyper realistic almost what video games look like. But The Last of Us takes it back just a notch, and they really show you what real life looks like. It's not just something knee deep in the future that would never happen. It looks and feels real down to the touch. You almost have to immerse yourself in the environment. And it's crazy because it's a third-person shooter, so you're not seeing the first-person perspective. You always have a sense of what's going on around you. So even when you're taking a step back to look at what's happening in the game, as that is your camera angle, you're still getting a full feel for this entire experience, and it is just crazy the amount of detail that's added in, from leaving footprints in the snow that don't go away to the shimmering on glass. I mean, everything works for the game. Now, gameplay-wise and story-wise, this thing takes it to a whole nother level. The game has introduced several new enemies, including the dogs.
Why can't I just fucking dodge it?
We saw shamblers.
Die, you freak! Oh, shit!
And we got to see another new enemy, the Stalker.
Oh.
Stalkers.
What? Fuck's a stalker? No, hang on. What's a stalker?
And of course, I can't forget about the best boss fight to ever exist with the new enemy introduced, known as the Rat King.
Everything is shaking. Oh my god! What the fuck is that? What is that? What is that? Get out!
This area was perfectly set up for horror, and it just gave Resident Evil Dead Space vibes the entire time. Basically, you have to go and explore the bottom level of the hospital, the darkest pits of this hospital, where Ground Zero broke out. Day 1, infected were brought there, and so since day 1 of this entire infection over the course of 7 years, because the game does follow the timeline correctly, there's been a fungus growing, and it has constantly been evolving to the point where it has become this mesh of disgusting infected that are put together, and it's the scariest thing you will ever come up against. But you could see where it had broken things. If you got anywhere near it, if it was in arm's reach, it was an instant one-shot. It rips your fucking neck in half.
What? Oh, I'm dead.
It's the craziest thing, and I thought it was just an amazing installment. It gave me chills the entire time, but the boss fight was also balanced, which is really important in a video game, to where you're not fighting him over and over and over again, even though the game hints that you're going to have to fight him once the stalker detaches from its body. Speaking of enemies, this game also tries to tell you that one nation's hero is another nation's terrorist, because there are many groups in this game, like, not cliques necessarily, but almost organizations or cults even, that fight one another, and they've always got beef with one another. So you see that The wolves have beef with just about everybody, and the Seraphites are kind of their enemy. But eventually, you try to find a way to help each other out through Lev and Yara, and you find out that there are people that have just lost their way and aren't doing things correctly, and that some people have just fallen into something horrible. So the only downside of all these new groups was definitely the group at the end of the game, because at the point where you're at the end of the game, you have lost your fight with Abby, but she lets you live one more time, kind of showing a bit of human restraint just because Lev is there to tell her no. And once you've lost that fight, you have yourself a happy life. Dina and Ellie have a child that they're raising together. They have a house, they have a farm. But Ellie still can't sleep at night knowing that Joel's death has gone unavenged. So she goes after Abby, and the whole time you've gone through, you find a new group of enemies headed by some fucking Ron Perlman looking guy who has no significance whatsoever and dies almost immediately. There's no purpose to the last group whatsoever other than another obstacle that developers couldn't explain because the Seraphites were too separated, and God only knows what happened to the wolves. They're on their own mission as everyone's looking for the fireflies. One thing that I thought was very controversial about the game that I personally think Naughty Dogs did very well was that they had to bounce around in a timeline, and it wasn't very straightforward, and it had players confused. It had some players angry. It didn't answer enough questions for all of the bouncing around, and it almost felt like there could have been 2 games made in The Last of Us Part 2, like maybe a Part 3 that followed up on Abby's story. But I personally thought they did it really well. Usually games and movies especially, X-Men is a perfect example of this. When you start bouncing through time, you start to confuse people to the point where they're so lost that they've lost all interest whatsoever. At the climax of this game, when you are face to face with Abby after she has just shot and killed Jesse and has Tommy pinned down on the ground, a gun to your face, you just stop. You stop all of the gameplay as Ellie, even though you were just having fun with it and everything was great. You stop and you start playing as Abby, the person that has killed Joel and has had no significance to the game whatsoever. Maybe if they sprinkled in just a little bit more Abby gameplay beforehand, it would have been something unique. But what they wanted to do was show you that Ellie is busy doing something while Abby is doing another thing, going through her own struggles. So I give them commendament for it, because I think it was very difficult for them to pull off, especially showing what was happening. You would go in as Abby, start playing as her, and you'd immediately bounce back 3 or 4 months, maybe even years, to see what's going on with Abby, why she's doing the things that she's doing. This is nearly impossible to pull off, but I think once they finally got all the loose ends tied up and put together, they really came through with something perfect, because you get to the point where you're almost done playing as Abby, and you have the moment where I broke was where Abby has Dina by the head and she is bashing her skull into the floor. I screamed. I straight up screamed. I was not having that. I wanted Ellie to shoot me dead and kill Abby. Even after I've seen everything with Abby, it didn't make up for any of it. And then you get to play as Ellie. Ellie getting to the last part of the game, the final boss fight. One of them is going to die. It is going to be Abby versus Ellie. Both brain and brawn on both sides clash like titans, where only one of them can come out. That's everyone's expectation. And what happens is you find Abby tied to a post, completely dehydrated, scrawny, rough hair. She is on the brink of death, doesn't want to fight, and even tells Ellie where there are boats so they can escape. And Ellie won't let her leave without a fight. when you get to the point where you are Ellie putting Abby's head down in the water, trying to drown her, another point where I screamed because I wanted Abby to kick my ass off and just either kill Ellie or something. Something needed to happen.
Ellie, let go!
Because she was already defeated and didn't want to fight. So the game just throws off your emotions constantly, and it makes you feel for both sides. It's never outweighing one or the other, because the challenge was getting a person like Abby, who has just killed Joel, everyone's favorite character, to become likable. That's crazy hard to do. How can you even fathom trying to make this character likable? Nobody wanted to play as Abby to begin with, and everyone wanted to rush through her part of the game, her half of it. But eventually you start to get into the flow of it, and you start to see what Abby is really going through, because the game's forcing you to go like, hey, you gotta take it down just a notch. You gotta slow down and really get a feel for this character. They make you do that, and it feels right. So you start sympathizing, and you start to really question, man, who is the bad guy? And it's not a question of who's the bad guy. It's a question of what are the limits? When does this end? What can we stop? Because there is no cure. You're stuck in this world forever, probably. And that's all you have is people anymore. And people are usually worse than the infected. What do you do, and when does it all stop? What is the point anymore? So it's just a crazy development, and I think that the game, I think Naughty Dogs, I think they did just an absolutely phenomenal job. Now, I've talked about most of the gameplay, and I think I want to end this with the ending of the game, because the ending leaves many questions, more than what was started in the game, because the ending of the game is Ellie has won, pretty much. She's got Abby pinned down in the water, drowning. Victory is literally at her fingertips, and she lets go. She sees a flash of Joel and knows that that's not what he would want. So she gets up off of her and tells her to take Lev and go. So she has won, but she's defeated. Nobody dies in the end. I was pretty upset with this on stream, but honestly now, I can't tell if it was either the worst ending possible or the perfect ending to this game, because it's human. Everyone expected a big boss fight clash with only one person coming out on top. That wasn't going to happen to begin with, and the damn game developers knew it. So the fact that they teased it, and throughout the game they have moments of teasing you for something, and it doesn't come to life. So after the big boss fight, you come back, and I guess before you even go, you tell Dina, I can't Ellie tells Dina, I can't sleep at night, I have to go do this. I mean, I don't care what you say, I'm leaving. She does just that. Goes for Abby. And then, defeated, comes walking back to the house where they were staying on their farm, picks up her guitar, plays a little tune, because the whole house is empty. All that's left is Ellie's room, full of her artwork, her paintings, and Joel's guitar. And she strums a few strings on it, and then sets it back down and leaves. This leaves questions as to where Dina's at, what if Ellie's still with Dina, or has she come back to having absolutely nothing, which I think would be perfect for it. But I've heard other people say that she's still with Dina, and she is just getting rid of all the Joel memories and moving on with her life. That's a good ending. But I think what would be just a little bit more heart-wrenching is if Ellie has just lost everything. She walked out on something perfect and has nothing to come back to whatsoever. I don't want to see Ellie hurt, because I've established such an emotional connection to her that I don't want to see that happen. But for gameplay's sake and for story, I want to see that happen. I want to see someone who had everything lose all of it. because of their own personal error. It couldn't even couldn't kill Abby like she said she was going to do. Walked out on Dina, and there's just nothing left for her to come back to except an empty house of nothingness but Joel memories that she needs to get rid of. Maybe tie that in. So will there be a Last of Us Part 3? I'm not sure. I don't want to see Naughty Dog just try to crank out as much as they can and milk this game for all it's worth. I'd like to see maybe a DLC or even a multiplayer mode like they had in the first game. But I don't want to see anything too crazy. I don't think I would want to see a third game. I really don't think it's necessary. I think they conveyed the story in this one really well. Maybe if we just got one little, we'll say 4 or 5 hour DLC to find out what's happening with Ellie and find out what's happening with Abby and Lev, because that's really all the players want to know. But that being said, it's a fantastic game, and I can recommend anybody to play it. Just make sure you're of the appropriate age. There is sex that happens in the game. There is a lot of blood, a lot of gore. There's swearing. Everything that would make it an M-rated game, it's there. So just be mindful of what you're doing. Be responsible with it. And I gotta say that being a standalone game, I would easily give it probably a 9.5 out of 10. But because it is a sequel and a couple things were a little flunky with it, it's definitely going to have to be like an 8.7. That's my final rating for the game, and I just think it was phenomenal. One of the best things I've ever played, and it's probably made for just about anyone. It's just unfortunate that it came out during a time when there is a pandemic in the world and people don't want to be reminded of it. So timing is a little bit off. Still a great game if you can reach around that and find yourself questioning humanity, because that's what the whole game is trying to do for you. So thank you guys so much for watching this, and I will see you all in the next one.